The heat was unbearable, but nothing compared to the searing pain that scorched deep inside Kira's soul. It was a kind of heat that made her chest tighten, her breath hitch, and her fists ball up in fury. That night, the streets were slick with rain, the sound of thunder rolling in the distance, as if even nature itself was preparing for what was about to unfold. But what no one knew, not the cops who dragged her to grill, not the witnesses who stood by and watched in silence, was that Kira was about to ignite a storm of her own. The kind of storm that would burn them all, leaving their careers, their lives, and their very reputations in ashes. And it all began when they thought they could break her. They were wrong. Kira James had always been a fighter, but not the kind you might expect. She wasn't the loud, rebellious type, nor the one to throw punches when things went wrong. She was intelligent, determined, and the type of young woman who believed in making a difference the right way. At just 24, she was on her way to becoming a lawyer, someone who could fight injustice from within the system, someone who could bring about real change. She was a beacon of hope for her community, her family, and herself. Her life was a quiet one, filled with books, late-night study sessions, and dreams of making it to law school. But like many people of color, especially in small towns, she knew the ugly truth. Justice wasn't always blind, and sometimes the system was broken beyond repair. Her father, a retired police officer who had seen the worst of the job, often warned her, "There are some battles you can't fight alone, Kira. You need to be ready to stand strong." Those words had always lingered in her mind, but she never thought she would have to live them out in such a violent way. It was a warm summer evening when everything changed. Kira had been out with her friends, celebrating a small victory in a long-winded legal internship application process. They had grabbed dinner at a local restaurant, laughing and talking about their futures. But as the night wore on, something shifted. As she stepped out of the restaurant to grab a breath of fresh air, the lights of a squad car flashed in her peripheral vision. Before she could react, a strong hand gripped her wrist, pulling her back toward the vehicle. "Where do you think you're going?" One of the officers sneered, his breath smelling of alcohol. It was Officer Mitchell, known for his short temper and disdain for anyone who wasn't his kind. Kira's stomach sank as she realized what was happening. The officer didn't give her a chance to explain. With a brutal yank, he shoved her into the back of the car. Her mind raced, her heart pounded. Was she being arrested? Why? She hadn't done anything wrong. The more she struggled, the more aggressive they became, their anger boiling over with each attempt to regain control. "You think you can just walk away, huh? We own these streets, girl." Officer Mitchell spat, his voice dripping with venom. Kira was still trying to make sense of the situation when the second officer, a lanky man named Officer Kane, entered the back seat. His cold eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, Kira could see that he was savoring the moment, like this was just another notch in his belt. The car took off, but it didn't head toward the local precinct. No, it took a sharp left into an isolated area of town, an old, rusted industrial lot that barely saw any traffic. Kira's pulse quickened, and she struggled against the handcuffs that dug into her wrists. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, her voice trembling but strong. "Just shut up," Officer Mitchell snarled, slapping her across the face. Kira's vision blurred for a second as her head snapped to the side. The next thing she knew, they were pulling into a dark corner of the lot, where a large, intimidating structure loomed in the distance. The grill. The smell of old charred metal filled the air, and Kira felt her stomach lurch as realization hit. Kira had heard whispers of the place before, rumors of a sick ritual that the local officers sometimes used to assert control over the community. It wasn't just a grill. It was a symbol of their power, a tool to break people down, humiliate them, and show who was in charge. The officers yanked her out of the car, laughing as they shoved her toward the makeshift grill. It was a metal frame, hot to the touch, where they had, on more than one occasion, 4 suspects, mostly people of color, into submission. The grill itself wasn't meant to burn them physically. It was designed to degrade, to humiliate. "You're gonna learn some respect tonight," Officer Mitchell growled, his fingers tightening around her arms. Kira's heart raced. Every fiber of her being screamed to fight, but her body was tired, bruised from the force of the arrest. There was no way out, not physically, but she wasn't going down without a fight. "Let me go," Kira demanded, her voice steady despite the dread creeping into her chest. But the officers only laughed. Officer Kane shoved her onto the grill, its metal surface scorching against her skin. The heat was unbearable, but it was the mental and emotional toll that really began to gnaw at her. She could feel the weight of the injustice pressing down on her, like the very world was trying to crush her. Tears filled her eyes, not from the pain, but from the sheer helplessness. The officer stood over her, watching with smug expressions, waiting for her to break. But instead of breaking, something inside Kira snapped. She wasn't just a victim of their cruelty. She was the one who would bring them to justice. She clenched her fists, her heart racing as she whispered to herself, "I will make them pay. I will burn them all in court." The officers left her there, assuming they had broken her spirit. They drove off, their laughter still echoing in her ears. But what they didn't know was that Kira wasn't the kind of person to stay down. She had been pushed to the edge, and now she was ready to fight back. Her body was bruised, battered, and her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. As she slowly stood up from the grill, she took in her surroundings, the dim lights of the lot flickering like a cruel reminder of what had just happened. But something inside her had ignited. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. Kira knew she couldn't go to the police. They were the ones who had done this to her. She needed proof. She needed allies, and she needed time to heal. But she would make them regret their actions. She would make sure they never hurt anyone again. Kira spent the next few days lying low, her injuries hidden under long sleeves and hoodies. The physical pain was bad, but the emotional scars were worse. But with each passing day, she began to formulate her plan. She reached out to an old friend who worked as a private investigator. She gathered evidence, collecting witness testimonies, and preparing to build a case that would expose the truth. But as the days turned into weeks, Kira realized something even more disturbing. Officer Mitchell and Officer Kane weren't just rogue cops. They were part of a larger system, a corrupt network that had protected each other for years. Taking them down would require more than just evidence. It would require a battle. Kira wasn't scared of them. She had something they didn't, an unyielding resolve. And with the right allies, she would burn them in court, turning their arrogance into ashes. Will Kira get the justice she deserves? Will the corrupt officers who tried to break her face the consequences of their actions? Kira sat in the dimly lit room, her laptop open in front of her, and the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she prepared to make the first move in what would be the battle of her life. The legal documents and police reports she had gathered sat stacked neatly beside her, proof that the two officers who had tormented her weren't just rogue cops. They were part of something bigger, something darker. She had only one chance to take them down. The system that protected them would stop at nothing to keep them safe. But Kira had made a vow. She wasn't going to let them destroy her. She was going to burn them, one by one, in a courtroom they couldn't escape from. And with every passing second, the heat inside her built up, ready to explode. The days after the assault were some of the hardest Kira had ever faced. Physically, she was bruised, battered, and in pain. The burns from the grill still left marks on her arms and legs, and her body ached from the relentless beating. But it was an emotional toll that truly weighed her down. The humiliation, the helplessness, the rage. Kira had to push it all aside and focus on one thing: justice. Her first move was to contact an old friend, Malik Washington, a private investigator who specialized in cases involving police corruption. Malik had helped Kira's father in the past, and she knew she could trust him to help her expose the truth. "I don't know what you got yourself into, Kira, but I'll help you," Malik said when Kira called him, his voice filled with concern. "I need to take them down, Malik," Kira replied, her voice steady but filled with determination. "They thought they could break me, but they've only made me stronger. I need to expose everything they've done, and I need it before they find out I'm coming for them." Malik agreed to help, and together they began to dig deeper. Over the course of the next few weeks, Kira and Malik uncovered a trail of corruption that ran deeper than she could have ever imagined. The two officers, Mitchell and Kane, had been involved in numerous cases of police brutality, racial profiling, and abuse of power. But what was more shocking was the system that had shielded them for years. The higher-ups in the police department were complicit, turning a blind eye to their actions, protecting them because they knew how valuable the officers were to the system. Kira's stomach twisted as she realized how deep the rot went. But the most shocking discovery came when they found a series of emails between Officer Mitchell and several other officers, discussing plans to frame innocent people of color for crimes they hadn't committed. They were using their position to extort, harass, and manipulate the vulnerable for personal gain. Kira's fingers trembled as she read through the emails. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about an entire community, about everyone they had destroyed with their corrupt actions. With the evidence in hand, Kira knew the hard part was only just beginning. She had to find a way to bring it all to light. The system that had protected Mitchell and Kane for so long wasn't going to give up without a fight. Kira needed allies in the legal world, people who could help her navigate the storm she was about to unleash. She reached out to a former law professor, Professor Linda Harris, a renowned civil rights attorney who had taken on cases involving police misconduct in the past. Professor Harris had been one of Kira's mentors during law school, and Kira knew she would be the perfect ally for the case. When Kira shared the details with her, Professor Harris was shocked but resolute. "This is going to be a tough fight, Kira, but I've seen what people like Mitchell and Kane do, and I know how the system tries to protect them. We need to bring everything we've got, every piece of evidence, every witness, and every person they've wronged. If we can show the jury the depth of their corruption, we have a chance." Kira nodded, her resolve hardening. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She would face an uphill battle, not just against the two officers, but against an entire system that had protected them for years. But Kira wasn't afraid. She had something more powerful than fear: the truth. As the case began to take shape, Kira started to feel the pressure. She had already received several anonymous threats warning her to back off, to drop the case, or face the consequences. The threats had escalated from phone calls to more sinister acts. Her tires slashed, strange cars parked outside her apartment, and even threatening messages left on her door. But Kira refused to be intimidated. She had seen the worst of what these officers were capable of, and she knew they would stop at nothing to protect their empire of corruption. Still, she couldn't let fear control her. She had to push forward, no matter the cost. Malik stood by her side, offering reassurance and protection when necessary. "They want to scare you, Kira," he said one night after another threat had come through. "But the more they threaten you, the more you know you're on the right path. They're scared, and that means you're doing the right thing." Kira took comfort in his words, but the fear was real. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the countless others who had been victimized by the very system meant to protect them. Just when Kira began to feel overwhelmed, a breakthrough came. A former officer from the same department, a man named Marcus Foster, reached out to her. He had been silently watching her progress, and after weeks of internal struggle, he decided to come forward with his own testimony. "I've seen what they've done," Marcus told Kira, his voice shaky but determined. "I couldn't stay silent any longer. They ruined my career. They ruined so many lives. And now, I want to help you bring them down." Marcus's testimony was crucial. He had witnessed firsthand the corruption that Mitchell and Kane had been involved in, and he had knowledge of other cases that hadn't even been uncovered yet. With his help, Kira's case grew stronger, and for the first time since everything had started, Kira began to feel a flicker of hope. But just as things were starting to come together, Kira received a chilling phone call. "Don't think for 1 second that you're going to win this." Officer Mitchell's voice was cold and menacing on the other end of the line. "You think you can take me down, but you're just a little girl. You're nothing." The line went dead. Kira's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. She was done being afraid. With the trial set to begin in just a few days, Kira knew the stakes had never been higher. The courtroom would be a battleground, and the officers would stop at nothing to cover up their crimes. Kira would need every ounce of strength, every bit of support she had gathered, to bring them down. But as she sat there, staring at the stacks of evidence, she knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And in the end, she would make them burn. The sound of her heels clicking on the cold, marble floor echoed through the courtroom, each step reverberating in Kira's chest like a drumbeat. This was it. The moment she had been preparing for, the moment that would define her, change everything she had worked for, and put the corrupt officers who had tormented her under the microscope of justice. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, the jurors, the spectators, the defense team, and most chilling of all, the smug faces of Officer Mitchell and Officer Kane. They were sitting there, arrogant and calm, like they had nothing to fear, as if their years of getting away with abuse would protect them. But what they didn't know was that Kira had already built her case like a fortress, and no matter how hard they tried to push her down, she was ready to burn them in court. Kira had never been this nervous in her life. Sitting at the defense table, her hands trembled slightly, but she knew better than to let her anxiety show. Her lawyer, Professor Harris, gave her a reassuring nod, as if to remind her that she wasn't alone. Kira's team was ready, but this trial was unlike any she had imagined. The stakes were higher than ever, and the opposition had one major advantage: power. The officers had a network of allies in the police department and the legal system who would stop at nothing to protect them. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She couldn't let the pressure of the situation distract her. She had done everything she could to prepare. The evidence was solid. The witnesses were lined up. She just needed to stay focused, to stay strong, and to trust in her plan. The courtroom was buzzing with tension as the judge entered, his stern face setting the tone for the day. Kira stood and watched him take his seat, his gavel slamming down with authority. "Court is now in session," the judge said, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. Kira's heart raced as she sat back down, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She glanced at Malik, who was sitting in the back of the courtroom, a reassuring presence in the sea of tension. Kira was ready, but she knew this wasn't going to be easy. Not with the kind of power that Mitchell and Kane had. Professor Harris stood up, her commanding presence filling the room. She addressed the jury, her voice steady and full of conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we are here to seek justice for Kira James, a young woman who was brutally assaulted by 2 police officers in a manner that can only be described as an abuse of power. Kira was subjected to physical and emotional torment, subjected to a cruel form of humiliation and violence that no one should ever endure. And we are here to make sure that those responsible are held accountable." Kira's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and hope as Professor Harris laid out the case. This wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had been victimized by a corrupt system. It was about exposing the truth. Professor Harris continued, "We will show you the evidence of their abuse. We will show you the countless times Officer Mitchell and Officer Kane have crossed the line, abusing their power and tormenting the vulnerable. We will prove to you that this is not just an isolated incident. It's part of a larger pattern of corruption that must be eradicated. These men believed they were untouchable. Today, we show them they were wrong. Kira watched as the defense team prepared for their rebuttal. She could see Officer Mitchell's smug grin. He was so sure of himself, so convinced that no one could touch him. But Kira knew better. This was only the beginning. Kira was called to the stand first, and her heart pounded in her chest as she stood up and walked toward the witness box. She could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on her, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't afford to let her nerves get the best of her. As she took the stand, the defense attorney, a slick, middle-aged man named Richard Lawson, stood up to begin his cross-examination. "Miss James, is it true that you were out on the night in question, celebrating your internship acceptance?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Kira nodded, her voice clear. "Yes, I was celebrating. It was a happy occasion." "So you were in high spirits, enjoying yourself?" Lawson pressed. Kira hesitated for a moment, knowing what he was trying to do, discredit her character, but she wouldn't let him twist the truth. "I was having a good time, yes, but that didn't justify what happened next," she replied, her voice firm. Lawson sneered. "But surely you must have been causing a scene, provoking the officers in some way. What was it that made them arrest you?" Kira's eyes narrowed, and she stood tall. "I didn't cause a scene. They arrested me for no reason, without explanation, and then they took me to that lot, where they subjected me to that grill." A murmur ran through the courtroom at her words. The image of the officers dragging her to the grill, forcing her to endure their cruel punishment, seemed to hang in the air like a suffocating fog. "But no one else saw this grill or has corroborated your story, Miss James," Lawson continued. "How can we trust that this isn't just your word against theirs?" Kira's jaw clenched, but she didn't back down. "The truth is in the evidence. We have photographs, emails, and witnesses. People who saw what happened that night. People who are willing to testify. Officer Mitchell and Officer Kane have been getting away with this for too long. It's time for the truth to come out." The defense attorney shifted uneasily. "But none of these so-called witnesses can verify your version of events, can they? Your claims are based on hearsay and speculation." "Not hearsay," Kira shot back, her voice growing stronger with every word. "It's truth, and truth is something I'm going to make you face, whether you want to or not." The next witness was Marcus Foster, the former officer who had risked his career to come forward. As he took the stand, Kira's heart swelled with gratitude. He was putting himself on the line, and his testimony was vital to her case. Marcus described in vivid detail the corruption within the department, naming names and revealing the extent of the officers' abuse. But it wasn't just Marcus's testimony that shook the room. It was the evidence that followed. Kira and her team had uncovered a series of disturbing emails, where Mitchell and Kane discussed framing innocent people, manipulating evidence, and covering up their crimes. One of the most damning pieces of evidence came from an internal memo in the department, in which Mitchell had written, "We can't let the N asterisk 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 get away with this. This is our town. We control it, not them." The racial slurs were undeniable. It was clear that Mitchell had no regard for the law, only for his own power. As the jury absorbed this evidence, Kira could see the shift in their expressions. The smugness on Mitchell's face was starting to crack. The officers who had once thought they were untouchable were now beginning to realize that their actions had consequences. Just when Kira felt like she had the upper hand, disaster struck. As Professor Harris was preparing to present the final piece of evidence, an audio recording of Mitchell and Kane discussing their plans for Kira, something unexpected happened. The defense team rose quickly, and Richard Lawson launched into a fierce objection. "Your Honor, we have reason to believe that the evidence being presented is inadmissible. The chain of custody has been broken. This audio cannot be trusted. The judge looked at the defense lawyer, then at Kira's team. Explain, Professor Harris. Your Honor, the audio was legally obtained and the chain of custody was intact. Professor Harris responded firmly, but as the judge deliberated, Kira's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at it, her breath catching in her throat. It was a message from Malik. They're trying to get the recording thrown out. They'll do anything to protect Mitchell and Kane. Be ready for the fight of your life. Kira's stomach dropped. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but this was more than she had anticipated. If the recording was ruled inadmissible, their entire case would crumble. The tension in the courtroom was unbearable as the judge deliberated. Kira could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. She had come so far, but now everything was on the line. If the judge ruled against them, everything would fall apart. The officers would walk free, and Kira would have nothing but her own shattered dreams. And then, in the midst of the silence, the judge spoke. I will make my ruling after a brief recess. Kira's heart skipped a beat. A recess meant they were getting closer to a decision, closer to the final verdict. But what would that decision be? Kira sat in the courtroom, her hands tightly gripping the edge of the table. The weight of the moment hung in the air, thick and suffocating. She had given everything for this. Her heart, her soul, her courage, and now it was all up to the judge. Every argument, every shred of evidence, every sacrifice had led to this final moment. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the judge, a stern man with a weathered face, returned to his seat after the brief recess. Kira's pulse raced as he glanced over the papers in front of him. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. Mitchell and Kane sat across from her, their smug grins still intact, though there was a hint of uncertainty in their eyes now. Kira had fought for this moment. She wasn't going to let it slip away. Not now. The judge raised his hand, and the room fell silent. For what seemed like an eternity, the judge flipped through his papers, his eyes scanning the case notes. Kira's heart pounded in her chest as she looked around the courtroom. The defense team, led by the slippery Richard Lawson, sat in their seats, the same confident smirks plastered on their faces. But Kira knew better. She could see the cracks beginning to form. The prosecution had done its job. Kira had done hers. They had exposed the corruption. They had revealed the abuse. The evidence was there. The witnesses were credible, and the truth was undeniable. The judge finally looked up. He cleared his throat, and every muscle in Kira's body tightened. The moment of reckoning had arrived. After reviewing all the evidence presented and considering the testimony of all parties involved, I have come to a decision, the judge began, his voice cold and authoritative. Kira held her breath. Mitchell and Kane sat motionless, their faces betraying no emotion, though Kira could sense the anxiety beneath their calm exteriors. They had thought they were untouchable, but the walls were closing in. She could feel it. Officer Mitchell and Officer Kane, the evidence against you is overwhelming. You both have been involved in acts of brutality, abuse of power, and corruption, all of which were systematically concealed by the very institution that was meant to protect and serve. Your actions have not only violated the law, but have inflicted untold damage on the victims who trusted you. The judge's words cut through the room like a knife, and Kira felt a sense of vindication. She wasn't alone anymore. She had fought for this day, and the truth was finally being acknowledged. However, the judge continued, his voice suddenly sharp. There's a matter of procedure that complicates the case. The defense has raised a legitimate concern about the admissibility of the audio evidence in question. Kira's stomach dropped. She could feel the blood rush to her face, a wave of panic threatening to take over. She had known the audio recording was crucial, but now the judge was questioning its validity. This wasn't over yet. We have reviewed the chain of custody of the evidence. After careful consideration, the judge said, looking directly at the defense team. The court finds that while there were some irregularities in the handling of the audio recording, it is admissible under the circumstances. A gasp ran through the courtroom. Kira's heart soared. The judge wasn't throwing it out. They had just won a huge victory. Officer Mitchell and Officer Kane, you are hereby suspended from duty pending further investigation into your actions. This trial is not over, the judge continued. You will stand trial for your actions, and your involvement in these crimes will be further scrutinized. As of now, you are both facing charges of misconduct, excessive force, and racial profiling, among others. Kira's breath caught in her throat. The officers were not just losing the case. They were losing their careers, their reputations, and their freedom. Just when Kira thought victory was within her grasp, a new twist came from an unexpected source. Richard Lawson, the defense attorney, stood up with a sharp look on his face. Your Honor, we would like to submit a motion for mistrial, he said, his voice loud and defiant. Kira felt her stomach churn as the room fell into an uproar. A mistrial? After everything they had been through, the defense was trying to delay the inevitable, trying to use legal loopholes to escape the consequences of their actions. Professor Harris immediately rose to object. Your Honor, the motion for mistrial is without merit. The evidence is clear. The witnesses are credible. There is no reason to postpone justice any longer. But Lawson wasn't backing down. We have new evidence, he declared, holding up a file in his hand. Evidence that could completely change the course of this trial. We demand that it be considered before any final ruling is made. The judge glanced at the file, his expression unreadable. What evidence is this, Mr. Lawson? Lawson opened the file and handed it to the judge, his eyes never leaving Kira. It's a recording of Kira James. Kira's blood ran cold. The last thing she wanted was for her personal life to be dragged into the courtroom, especially when the defense was desperate. But she had no idea what they had on her. What is this? Kira's voice trembled slightly as she turned to face the judge. Her nerves stretched to the breaking point. This recording, Lawson continued, was made by a confidential source. It's an exchange between Miss James and a convicted felon. It could imply that she was involved in a criminal conspiracy. Kira's heart stopped. A criminal conspiracy? This was a lie, a complete fabrication. She had never been involved in anything like that. The defense was trying to discredit her, trying to turn the tables and make her the criminal. The courtroom erupted into chaos as the judge called for order. Kira stood frozen, her mind racing. This was it. This was the fight of her life. Malik, who had been silently sitting in the back of the courtroom, suddenly stood up. Kira's eyes locked with his, and in that instant, she knew something was wrong. He wasn't supposed to be involved in this trial. He had been a confidant, a friend, someone who had helped her gather evidence. But now his expression had changed. He looked tense, as if he was holding something back. Your Honor, I need to speak, Malik said, his voice shaking as he stepped toward the front courtroom. The judge nodded, and Malik turned to face Kira, his eyes filled with sorrow. I'm sorry, Kira, Malik said, his voice barely above a whisper. I had no choice. They forced me. They have the leverage. They know about the recording, and they're threatening my family. Kira's heart sank. Malik, the one person she had trusted above all others, had betrayed her. He had given the defense the very evidence that could ruin her case. You don't have to do this, Kira whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of hurt and disbelief. You promised you'd help me. You said you'd protect me. Malik's face was ashen, his hands trembling as he faced her. I didn't want to do this. I tried to protect you, but they got too much power. I'm sorry. Kira stood in the courtroom, her world crumbling around her. Her closest ally had turned against her, and now the defense had the upper hand. The recording was in their hands, and with it, They could destroy everything she had worked for. But Kira wasn't done. Not yet. Your honor, Kira called out, standing tall despite the storm raging inside her. I refuse to let them win. This isn't just my fight. It's for everyone they've hurt. If I have to expose every last bit of corruption to bring them down, I will. I will not let them silence me. Not now. Not ever. The judge stared at her, and for a brief moment, there was silence. What would happen next? Would Kira's final plea be enough to turn the tide? Or would the defense's latest move be the end of everything she had fought for? The battle is far from over. Will Kira's determination be enough to push to the final obstacle, or will the corrupt system win? What's next for Kira? Will she ever get the justice she deserves? Kira's journey wasn't just about one woman fighting for justice. It's about all of us standing up against the systems that try to silence our voices. She proved that even in the face of unimaginable odds, with unwavering strength, truth can break through the darkness. Her fight is a reminder that when we unite against corruption and inequality, we are unstoppable. We are all capable of standing up for what is right, no matter how broken the system may seem. Kira's story is one of hope, resilience, and the undeniable power of the truth. It's time to rise. The fight is far from over, and your voice, your actions, matter. If Kira's story inspired you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe now to be part of the movement for justice, change, and truth. Join us as we continue to tell stories that demand attention, spark conversations, and fuel real-world change. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that their voice matters. Stay tuned for more powerful stories. Together, we can rewrite the narrative and create the change we want to see in the world. Subscribe, comment, and be the change.